All right. Hello. Check, check, one, two. Okay, so I'm just going to go right into part six. I had to put a shirt on because it's cool down here, but we're not going to get into too many tabs. This is really Brandeis part six, the science of law, is probably my favorite. This is really where I gained a perspective on law, social science, and how these engineers looked at law as the most important aspect to social control. So, without any further ado, appreciate everybody watching the last one. It's a long one. I don't even know. I'm uh, converting it right now. I don't know how long it was, but it was at least close to 3 hours. But it had to be done because how socialism entered America is very seldom shown or told. So, you had to be introduced to a bunch of people. Grammar was thick on Brandeis Part 5. So, Brandeis Part 6 shouldn't be that tough. But so, all the artwork that you see associated with any of my work, it's me. I'm doing my best to be an intelligent creative, make something beautiful and attractive. This is a Master of Arts degree, of which, the trivium is the three roads: grammar, logic, rhetoric. We just saw the introduction, the little triangle: grammar, logic, rhetoric. The ability to remember names, places, and events, and then to chain reasoning together with all of those. This is like a giant puzzle. So Brandeis Part 6, the science of law. We introduce you to the founders of sociology in America. That's largely who we see here. And the creation, a substantial, almost quantum leap in the subjugation of America through installation of law, in particular sociological jurisprudence, made popular by Brandeis. The infusion of social science as the way to argue law rather than arguing law through legal processes or legal arguments. It became far more about providing stats, data, information, and uh, the idea of the Brandeis brief here we see permeating the whole idea, the idea of drawing attention to some injustice and then demanding redress. So these men here: Edward Allsworth Ross, from left to right, George Eliot Howard, Lester Frank Ward, Nathan Roscoe Pound, Albion Woodbury Small would be the key figures in the creation of social science here in America. They call it sociology at first, but then it gets broken into all the various different aspects. Lester Frank Ward, you can see he's the father of the welfare state, Mr. Pork Chops. And we're going to get into most prominently Ross. I suppose Nathan Roscoe Pound, too. I mean, he's 33rd degree Master Mason and the Dean of Harvard Law School, by the way. All at the same time, here we see Russell Sage Foundation. So that's the executive arm of Skull and Bones. So Brandeis, sociological jurisprudence in the Harvard Law School. This is really out of the Harvard Law School is how many things even today are spread and grown and evolved from an idea into institutions cross county, state, federal, into a nation or school of thought. So you'll see that here as well. At the close of the 19th century, experts in written law, jurists, were of three general schools of thought: philosophical, historical, and analytical. And according to Nathan Roscoe Pound, the dean of Harvard Law School, the failure of these three schools was twofold. For Pound, the previous forms of jurisprudence were either too reliant on the past or treading too haphazardly or experimentally into the future. Quote, trial and error, an ad hoc approach. The answer, according to Pound, was a clearly defined sociological legal policy that would eliminate these previously harmful retrospective and prospective accidental models. Now, this is straight out of the book that's in the background there. You can see Pound, the scope and purpose of sociological jurisprudence. According to Pound, the path to the most efficient form of law would not be formally realized by following the historical, analytical, or philosophical schools of thought, but by forming a necessary synthesis of the three into a type of legal progressivism. No, synthesis. Hegelian, taking these three schools and melding them into one and calling it legal progressivism. Honestly, you have to sit and take that in for a second. Much like Reformed Judaism is actually progressive Judaism. This word progressive, like the pride flag, the new one that's included transgender and the native aboriginals, it's called the progress pride flag. So I invite you now to have your ears and eyes open for this word progress, this word new, radical social reform. Seriously, man, when you catch wind of this, you are in the top percentile of the knowledgeable historians going back 100 and something years. You differentiate yourself to an incredible degree when you start to understand the progressive era. You see the gatekeepers, you see the primary narrative, the secondary narratives, all of this. It's just all laid out in front of you. And there's really little guesswork anymore as to what's going on, right? Many people say, make this make sense, Diego. Well, you got to be committed. I would say, through this series, if you were to commit 12 to 14 hours of your own time over the next year, those 14 hours would allow you to have a perspective, not a perception of how things are. So Pound stating, quote, a wholly new creed is framing to bring these formerly divergent schools into something like accord. We should expect a new school to arise from this breakdown of the older schools. This is classic progressivism. New schools in the place of old schools. And there are many signs that such an event has taken place. Jurists are coming together upon a new ground from different starting points. The rising and still formative school to which we may look chiefly henceforth for advance in juristic thought may be styled the sociological school. Okay. Dean of Harvard Law School, 33rd degree Master Mason. And in this story, I have sources, I believe. We can go down. Do we? Yes. Most of my articles, I'm going to have a footnote section. Some of them I haven't. I just included the source material, links, and all of that in the body of the work. I like doing this rather. And you can see there's my sources, Harvard Law Review, Scope of Purpose and Sociological Jurisprudence is what we were just reading from. And then Brandeis, A Life from Urofsky. I don't have Brandeis, A Life. Or do I? I might. I've got Brandeis, A Free Man's Life. That's by Mason. He's a key Brandeis biographer. Thick. This is the one I mentioned in the last show. I think it's a first edition printing. And if you could smell it right now, it's like, smells like Railroad, 1946. This was published. And you think about how many people have actually read this, probably very few. So how many times has this book been opened? Not very many. But man, you can smell that dust. It's pretty bad. So Free Man's Life is one of the sources. But A Life by Yurovsky, Melvin Yurovsky, is also another one. Louis Brandeis, Justice for the People by Philippa Strom. She's another official biographer. We actually got the books because I want to remove all excuses. Well, he's just getting that off the internet. Oh, yeah. Can't believe everything you hear or read on the internet. Oh, yeah. Can we have some sources for that, please? Sure. Not upside down, though. The Social Justice, Louis Brandeis, one of the latest articles I put out. This is heavily referenced. Prophets of Regulation. Because Brandeis, there's 4 key guys there named, and Brandeis influences 3 of them, or influences 2 of them, the later 2. Landis is a clerk for Brandeis. They work intimately together, and they're the prophets of regulation over the 20th century, totally overhauled American life. Oh, and here's Melvin Yurovsky, another book that he wrote of Brandeis, Louis D. Brandeis and the Progressive Tradition. It's a beauty, huh? Look at it. And everybody walks by these at the bookstore. Don at McLeod's is intrigued by watching me go around in the books I'm collecting. He gets his helpers there, his employers, to go around and find books for me. And I couldn't shout out his name enough. Don at McLeod's Books in Vancouver. We will be seeing you in October, my friend. Okay, so Louis D. Brandeis and the Progressive Tradition, another incredibly important book. It's in such good condition. This is copyright 81, first printing. It was $11.95, brand new. I'm not sure what I paid for it. Great condition. Jeffrey Rosen, another official biographer of Brandeis. Louis Brandeis, the American Prophet. Try to keep my ugly fingernails out of there. I just came from the farm. Just look at the book. Look at that guy. Louis Brandeis. We've gotten basically everything that his biographers have written. I've almost got it all. Okay, I took the cover off this one. This is modern, published 2017. And I've shown this before on the podcast, The House of Truth by Brad Snyder. I think he's a history professor at Georgetown now. He was originally Wisconsin. If you follow my work, you'll know what that means. The West, as they were coming west in the Manifest Destiny, was more progressive than the Eastern Seaboard population. This is what they said. And it makes sense if you think about it. The more Western you go, the more progressive the people you're gonna meet. Louis Brandeis, The Letters of Louis Brandeis, Volume 4. I couldn't find the other 3. I am in search for them. If you see them, please send them my way. Again, in real good shape, like nobody's ever actually read it. Somebody was smart enough or aware enough, can you see that? To make sure that his middle name was added in pencil. See that? Dembitz. That's his Zionist uncle that was working with Lincoln that I mentioned at the very end of our last show. This is really who inspires Brandeis to be a Zionist. This is why he changes his middle name from David to Dembitz in his mid to late 50s. This is when Brandeis becomes a Zionist leader, almost in his 60s. Brandeis in America by Nelson L. Dawson. Another Brandeis biographer. Incredibly beautiful book again. Brandeis Justice for the People. Did I show that one? I don't think so. There's him at his desk. This law firm. So you see that we're not screwing around. I think it's important for you to see where we're getting all this from, because we want to build a foundation as strong as granite for you then to build out your knowledge of this history and of your present day surroundings, where it all comes from, and to know that that's true is very important. We don't have any more beliefs. Here we do not follow savior attitudes. We are here to help ourselves become well-developed individuals, because a well-developed individual is a perfect antidote to a tyrannical government. So a well-developed individual who can support himself through food and all of those things becomes less manipulatable by the government. We can actually, in turn, make the government redundant if enough of us did it. So back to Roscoe Pound. And this is from my second source, which is what? Brandeis, A Life, Yurovsky. Okay. Holmes and later Roscoe Pound would be the great theorists of sociological jurisprudence, but Louis Brandeis would be its great practitioner. In 1908, when he submitted his path-breaking brief in Muller versus Oregon, he put into practice the theory he had learned Holmes talk about more than a quarter century earlier. So Brandeis is a great practitioner. This is where the Brandeis brief comes from. When you look up the Brandeis brief, you'll see that it is still being cited today as one of the greatest achievements in sociological history. The Brandeis brief. We've discussed it now enough, but I will reiterate that it's identifying an injustice being done to you and then demanding redress. This is where the NAACP, ACLU got its methods. So Holmes there mentioned is Oliver Wendell Holmes. He's also a honored guest at the House of Truth. It's this trifecta of Oliver Wendell Holmes, Felix Frankfurter, and Louis Brandeis, the three U.S. Supreme Court justices, that really the whole house evolves around, or revolves around, orbits. The House of Truth orbits these three men. So Brandeis lectured law at Harvard after graduation. So much like Lippmann stayed on for another year with Santayana, Brandeis lectured at Harvard after grad and founded both the Harvard Law School Association in 1886 and the Harvard Law Review in 1887, naming himself secretary and treasurer. That should blow your mind. Again, one of these instances which you think wasn't so modern, or I don't know. It was surprising to me to find out that the Harvard Law Review was invented or founded in 1887 by Louis Brandeis. But that is true. You can look it up. Many people call me names for saying those things, but it's true. And I've got provenance I can show you. So the HLSA, the Harvard Law School Association, is considered today the oldest association of its kind, and the Harvard Law Review, one of the largest circulated law journals in the world. Brandeis is influential in steering curriculum as a member of the advising committee, of which his trusty Zionist lieutenant, Julian Mack, was business manager. He's also creating secret Zionist societies at Harvard, don't forget, from part 3. The Parashim and the Menorah, with Horace W. Kalin, the guy that popularizes dual loyalty. I mean, Brandeis is fucking up America. So in that association, that is taking forward the responsibility in the direction of which Harvard Law Review will go. And Brandeis is owning the whole thing. He's not just even running it or he's on the chair. He's the founder. As Brandeis says, so it goes. Abracadabra. Brandeis regularly corresponded with the dean and faculty members, offering suggestions for courses and advice on the school's management. He provided both advice towards the creation of the Harvard Law Review, served as its first treasurer, and was a trustee until his appointment to the Supreme Court. Brandeis also served as a member of the law school's visiting committee, appointed by the Board of Overseers. Board of Overseers, right? 1889, 1890, and 1891 to 1919. So for whatever reason, they delineate there between 1889 to 1890 and then 1891 to 1919. There's 1 year there apparently, or a segment of time where he wasn't, perhaps. But you can see from 1891 to 1919, well after he was U.S. Supreme Court Justice. He was confirmed in 1916. By the time he steps down from the board of, or the school's visiting committee, appointed by the Board of Overseers, Brandeis was the international leader of Zionism, the architect of the Federal Reserve and the entire New Freedom campaign of Woodrow Wilson, the primary author of the creation of Israel, and progressive founder, great practitioner of a whole new system of law called sociological jurisprudence. So here's some prudence, here's some provenance I took from the website of Harvard Law School Association. Just took a screenshot, clipped it. It says 100 years ago, Louis Brandeis was nominated to serve on the United States Supreme Court. Brandeis, who entered Harvard Law School in September 1875, just shy of his 19th birthday, had a long history with the school, maintaining a close relationship even after his graduation. He was a key player in both the creation of the Harvard Law School Association and the Harvard Law Review, a member of the visiting committee and an advisor on the school's management and curriculum, regularly corresponding with deans and faculty members to offer suggestions. While on the court, Brandeis further cultivated his close relationship by allowing Professor Felix Frankfurter to choose all 21 of his clerks from among the school's alumni. So I've gone into that. Brandeis's law clerks and how he establishes the next generations of Brandeisian thinkers. So that artifact from celebrating the 100th anniversary of his confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court, Harvard Law Today, Harvard Law School Association, Carolyn Kelly, if you want to go look. Just put all that information in and it'll come up. So there's Brandeis and Oliver Wendell Holmes. You can see Wendell Holmes is significantly older than Brandeis. And much like Brandeis influences Woodrow Wilson through his naivete and his ideology. Woodrow Wilson, an idealist, right? Idealism. Same with Oliver Wendell Holmes. Oliver Wendell Holmes, far more wanting to experiment with the U.S. Constitution. This is what they talk about. Frankfurter would become Brandeis's surrogate, fulfilling the jurist's urge to be an activist, a need thwarted by the restraints of the black robe. It was Frankfurter who had picked up the burden of defending wages and hours legislation and who furthered the use of the Brandeis brief. It's page 200, the American Journal of Legal History, volume 22, number 3. Brandeis, Holmes, Frankfurter, Pound, all Phi Beta Kappa, Harvard Law School with honors. All hanging out at the same place. All establishing the new republic. U.S. foreign policy. So let's get to Nathan Roscoe Pound. He is the one most attributed with founding sociological jurisprudence in America. Pound studied Roman law, receiving his BA in 1888 and his MA in 1889. So he's a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts degree holder. And where did he get it? Somewhere where you wouldn't expect it, right? Nebraska University. Kind of seems strange, but when you understand Manifest Destiny, the idea of progressivism, Brandeis's family came over to America to open up the West with a Rothschild riding shotgun in their horse carriage. That's from Two Rothschilds and the Founding of Israel, or the Land of Israel, by Simon Schama. And if you've got a archive.org account, just put that in there. You can read that book yourself. It's not being published today, so it's in there. So in 1903, Pound became the dean of the University of Nebraska College of Law. Okay. And Brandeis and his family actually, after landing in Cincinnati, of all places, end up in Louisville, Kentucky. Omaha, some of the Brandeises landed. So you can see they're pushing west their idea. This is part of Manifest Destiny. And by the way, Donald Trump is the only president in history to use the term manifest destiny in his inaugural speech. Trump is sort of rekindling a lot of this thought of manifest destiny. And maybe he is trying to carry on where they had left off. But he's continuing the ideas of Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, and Louis Brandeis. You can see it when you look at the Oval Office, how he set it up. So from Harvard Law Today, Harvard Law School Association, he, meaning Brandeis. So whenever you see square parentheses like that, that means that the author, in this case, me, put in a word that wasn't originally in that quote. But I did it here in this case so that the reader reading my article can understand who he is. Okay? For those that don't know what a square parentheses is, it's when they insert something that wasn't in the original text. So he, Brandeis, was a key player in both the creation of the Harvard Law School Association and the Harvard Law Review, a member of the visiting committee and an advisor on the school's management curriculum, regularly corresponding with deans and faculty members to offer suggestions. It's the same source. Just two quotes from it. So in 1903, Pound became the dean of the University of Nebraska College of Law. In 1908, he was a founding editor of the annual bulletin of the American Bar Association. So we're talking about propaganda, institutions, and information. Here he is as an editor. In 1909, he taught at University of Chicago Law School, and in 1911, Pound moved to Harvard, first as a professor of law, and then from 1916 until 1936, almost exactly the amount of time that Brandeis is U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Brandeis is 1916 to 1939. And that 1939 is the 1 year of overlap between Brandeis and Frankfurter. Otherwise, it's 60 years almost of continued progressive thought through the U.S. Supreme Court. And when you look at the U.S. Supreme Court today, they're all Phi Beta Kappa too. All the key big names are all Phi Beta Kappa, as was Frankfurter, Pound, Holmes, and Brandeis. And it's the sister of one of the founders of PNAC, Robert Kagan. He founds PNAC in the 90s. I referenced that a little bit last show. His sister is in Brandeis' seat in the U.S. Supreme Court, seat number 4. So Pound stating in his foundational Harvard Law Review article, Sociological Jurisprudence, its scope and purpose, that lawyers are nothing less than social engineers who use their knowledge and experience of the law to deliberately create the framework for a better society. Social engineers, being lawyers, this is one thing I never really considered, but it is absolutely true. Once you start thinking about law, I mean, there's laws and rules. You can be put into jail if you don't follow these. I mean, that is the strongest form of social manipulation or engineering that you could have. It's greatest show of violence to keep somebody walking the proper path. The other great theorist of sociological jurisprudence mentioned in the above quote was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., nominated Supreme Court Justice in 1902. Holmes held that position for the next 30 years. One of the most cited justices in American history. Holmes, Harvard Law alum, stood defiantly against natural law and was famous for his prediction theory, believing that crime, especially recidivism, or the repeating of criminal offenses can be predicted and then prevented. We talked about Minority Report last episode. They get deep into the idea of crime prevention through prediction. So this idea is really old. So Pound defines law as a highly specialized form of social control. That's from the introduction, page 21. Social control through law. And I believe that that is Edward Alsworth Ross's book, this guy here. So now it gets interesting. Pound was the grand representative of Nebraska and made the orator of the Nebraska Grand Lodge in 1907. You don't know what we're talking about, it's Freemasonry. He was crowned 33rd degree in 1913, that most infamous of years, as the past master of Lancaster Lodge number 54, Ancient Free and Accepted Masons in Lincoln, Nebraska. When he left the cornfields for Boston, he didn't leave his apron behind. Pound was made Deputy Grand Master for the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, almost as if his promotion as a Mason was the main catalyst for his move to Harvard. Either way, they happened simultaneously. And according to Gould's History of Freemasonry Throughout the World, which I have 6-volume series of, cost me $300. This is where I get my source material from. Can you see that? It's kind of hard. Square and compass. Definitely difficult with the light. Other complications. Trying to tell the truth. But that's where I get this from. The Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts is not only the senior Grand Lodge, but also the senior Masonic body of any kind now functioning in the Western Hemisphere. And at its helm, Nathan Roscoe Pound, Phi Beta Kappa, Harvard Law School. So after completing postgraduate work in Germany, the founders of sociology all returned directly to America by design, where each would make significant pioneering contributions to the burgeoning field of sociology. So we're getting into these founders of sociology now. The 3 professors of sociology demonstrating a profound collective influence on Pound while at Nebraska. Pound becoming a member of the American Sociological Society, even though he wasn't a social scientist, serving on several of their committees, even contributing several articles. It's here at the University of Nebraska, surrounded by sociologists of the Prussian historical school, that Pound first formulates his revolutionary sociological approach to law. So here's some provenance from the Harvard Lodge, Ancient Free and Accepted Masons. Okay, so there's Freemasonic lodges on the campuses of Harvard. There's also secret Zionist society buildings and institutions there too. Okay, and if you get into what it says there, this is them saying it. The Harvard Lodge, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I would consider this a primary source. Harvard Lodge, AF and AM, was instituted on May 18th, 1922 as the first academic Masonic lodge in the United States. The lodge was founded primarily through the efforts of Roscoe Pound. At a private meeting of 14 master masons, it was decided that a new lodge in Cambridge be formed. There's others, the Harvard Masonic Club, the Square and Compass Club, the Harvard chapter of the Acacia fraternity. Interesting, right? Mind blown. And so in behind, I want to draw attention to these in behind. We're going to get to these. But I put these in the background for a reason, because what we're seeing is the evolution from a farm to a city. And it's coming straight out of these guys' books. Talk about manifest destiny going across America, establishing cities and communities. They're drawing it out literally. After completing postgraduate work in Germany, I've already read this. The founders of sociology all returned directly to America by design, where each would make significant pioneering contributions to the burgeoning field of sociology. And you can see here Roscoe Pound. You can find this at the Haiti Trust Archives. Nathan Roscoe Pound, 33rd degree, talking about Masonic jurisprudence. So this completely true yet far less mainstream view, revealing significant connections to both the Phi Beta Kappa Society and Freemasonry. Pound, not only a Grand Master, but is being chosen to pioneer new expansion into Ivy League academia while in charge of the most influential Masonic body in the Western Hemisphere, reveals a type of long view entrusted only to a 33rd degree Master Mason. Sociological school theorized by Pound and Holmes Jr. and practiced by Brandeis was first brought to America through the sociological department of the University of Nebraska, while Pound was professor of law, professor from 1899 to 1907, dean of Nebraska University College of Law from 1903 until 1911. So Roscoe Pound was close friends with the founders of sociology in America through their shared leadership of the American Sociological Association, Edward Allsworth Ross, George Eliot Howard, and Albion Woodbury Small, all served as presidents. Those are major names in social science. If there was a Mount Rushmore, it might be those four names right there. Not coincidentally, after graduating from American state colleges, all three men traveled abroad for at least a 2-year postgraduate program involving a newly forming, more specialized social science based on social science-based education not found in America. So here's where we see it coming from. These guys here, these Prussian intellectuals, Nies, Bluntschli, Ratzenhofer, Wundt. I think that's a Phi Beta Kappa key right there. I'm just figuring out right now. I bet you $10 that's a Phi Beta Kappa key. And I'm not so sure he's not in his regalia, his Masonic regalia here, although a U.S. Supreme Court justice looks strangely familiar or strangely similar. So here again, we see this pattern where they adopt ideas from Prussia and through the PhD program, bring them here. Because the PhD program didn't start in America, it started in Prussia. So these aren't the first founders or foreigners to get a PhD. That was the founders of our K through 12 education system, Edward Everett, Horace Mann, Granville Stanley Hall. Those were the first foreigners to get PhDs and then come back to America, adopt the system of indoctrination that we know as education here. Same thing happens here with social science, the introduction of social sciences, these soft sciences, researching human history, human behavior. So Pound's theory of a functional society stated that there must be, quote, social interest in general progress. So what they want to instill in us is a sense of liberalism, liberal sentimentality, and the general idea of human progress. We think this is just natural and an innate, baked into the cake, but it's not. This is instituted, deliberate, through conspiring, right? The claim or want or demand of society that the development of human powers and of human control over nature is another key aspect, that they want human control over nature. And does this not go directly back to the Enlightenment period? This is what they want. They almost absolutely, all of these men hate nature or natural law, human nature. It's, to them, they consider it chaos, and they're trying to put it all into order. This is why they call it the New World Order. So for the satisfaction of human wants go forward, the demand that social engineering be increasingly and continually improved. As it were, this self-assertion of the group toward higher and more complete development of human power. This interest appears in three main forms: an interest in economic progress, an interest in political progress, and an interest in cultural progress. Across the board, we're talking progress. We're talking the institution or the aspects of our Western society, whether it's economic, political, social, military, right? They're going to be infiltrated like Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley talked about. all at the same time. So Edward Allsworth Ross, as we kick Nathan Roscoe Pound to the curb, he's a sociologist professor at Nebraska University from 1901 to 1906, first studied theology and liberal arts. So he's getting a basis in religion and those 7 liberal arts at Coe College in the US and before attending the University of Berlin. Okay. Ross returns to the United States, landing at where? Honestly, they only land at 2 places, Chicago University or Johns Hopkins, where he gained a doctorate degree under Richard T. Ely, or Eli. He's a major founding progressive and economist. And he's a whole series in and of himself in how reformatory his life was. So Ross is said to be the most responsible for introducing Roscoe Pound to a sociological jurisprudence and a major influence in the development of early criminology authoring. Social Control, a survey of the foundations of order in 1901, and founding the first professional association of sociologists in the United States. Here it is, the American Sociological Society in 1905. Yep. They've named themselves with the acronym ASS. So they're a group, a collective of asses. 1905. And we were talking about this earlier. It's just lost from my mind now, but there was another, in our last show, there was another organization or society that they created. It was with the same acronym, ASS, and they changed it. The American Socialist Society. So you can see there's 0 degrees of separation here between these men. In 1912, Ross writes, Changing America. Again, progressive, implying, presupposing even that America needs to be changed. This is one of the aspects of progressivism. This is why you're not allowed to ask any questions. This is why the infusion of Comte's positivism. No time to ask questions. We're moving forward. We're sure of our ways and means and the ends. That's future perfect tense, right? We are sure the future is going to be great. He also wrote The Old World in the New in 1914. So see those years, 1912, 1914. And what is America in 1919? Ross was influenced by Marx's economic theory of class conflict, and both JHU and University of Chicago are more than any other American universities connected directly to German intellectualism and idealism. That's why I say, of course, they're going to land back here at Johns Hopkins or Chicago University. And they are indeed the two, the battery that pushes sociological jurisprudence or social science or sociology into the lexicon of American culture. From page 93, Edward Allsworth Ross, Social Control. Quote, law, the most formidable engine of control employed by society, end quote. From page 106 of the same book, quote, the law, the most specialized and highly finished engine of control employed by society. So he reiterates how important law is, something largely overlooked by every conspiracy theorist and truth teller that you got out there. But these are the most formative, most fundamental aspects to our subjugation, to our slavery. So 7 was that one. So from page 177, Human Organization, Law, and Social Engineering by Adam Podgorecki, University of Poland. Human Organization is the journal of the Society for Applied Anthropology. So that's the source I'm about to read from. Give me a sneak peek as to what we're doing here. Largely due to the work of Roscoe Pound, the concept of social engineering through law has been popular in the jurisprudence, sociology of law, and political science of the Western countries. So Social Control, a survey of the foundations of order. And that's the book that these pictures in the background are coming from. They're surveying how they can create the foundations of order. So For a few golden years, Nebraska laid full-time claim to the intellectual skills of three of the nation's most talented social scientists, Ross, Howard, and Pound. Roscoe Pound, an academic community on the Great Plains, the interactional origins of American sociological jurisprudence at the University of Nebraska, 1900 to 1907 by Michael R. Hill, published 1991. So turning next to the sociological components of Pound's jurisprudence, it is widely recognized that they were derived largely from the writings of Lester F. Ward, Albion Small, and most especially E.A. Ross, who was a colleague of Pound's at the University of Nebraska, Social Control Through Law, in the introduction, page 20. So another one of these founding fathers of social sciences here in America, George Eliot Howard, graduated, as did Small, from a community college, of which he received his Bachelor of Arts. This is what community colleges are. So there's an Association of American Universities, which is all the universities that you're familiar with. And then there's the Association of State Colleges. They're two separate associations. You can go look at it. And the delineating factor used to be liberal arts. But you can get a liberal arts degree at Harvard today. Ivy League University is just the same as any state college. So the founder of institutional sociology and the author of the groundbreaking A History of Matrimonial Institutions in 1876. So he's setting up the idea of marriage and matrimony and what that's supposed to look like in this system of order that they're creating. Howard went to Ludwig Maximilian's Universität in Munich, where he studied political science, history, and Roman law. Another connection back to Roman law. Howard returned to the States 2 years later, earning his MA. Because these, and I think I go through it later here, that the Prussian intellectuals demanded that if you're going to send them an American, he better be at least versed in grammar, logic, rhetoric. So Howard was appointed professor of political science and sociology and was the very first professor of history while also teaching public law with Pound at the University of Nebraska. In 1894, Howard received his PhD and in 1901 traveled to Stanford and was one of their original faculty members before resigning under controversy. This seems to be a theme with all of these guys resigning from universities under great controversy. Because they're pushing this socialist ideology, whether it's in social science, sociology, right? It's all socialism. For 2 years, he lectured at Chicago University before returning to NU in 1903, named the head of the Department of Political Science and Sociology and professor of institutional history. Howard remained at NU until his death nearly 20 years later. Pound, Howard, and Ross all were members of the University of Nebraska Graduate Club and met regularly at each other's homes to present and discuss papers and direction. They were members of a smaller, more intimate group, a dinner club known as the Congenial 10. There, they discussed the pressing sociological issues of society, and both Ross and Pound were social and intellectual spark plugs who drew people together and got them talking. So what is that but a political salon? So here's some of the books that these guys wrote. Here's one of the main sources of material, Social Control Through Law, Roscoe Pound, Changing America, Edward Allsworth Ross. There's the cover, and To My Master. He dedicates his book to Lester F. Ward, the founder of the nanny state or the welfare state. So they want dependency on a highly centralized government, okay? They want every citizen of America to be dependent on the state, which is exactly opposite of classical liberalism. So here's some pages taken from that book. And it indicates the first settlement, right? Near water, probably agricultural considerations. They call it the farm. And it's broken up into a few different segments. And it's at the meeting of rivers or trails. So it's established largely on geographical detail, is is the important aspect to remember here. And then you can see how it grows from the farm into the rural group, where farms are got larger plots. And then that rural group turns into a village. And now we got a little bit of order. Streets are being defined. Houses have their own ways. Yeah. So from the village to the city. And now you see a largely developed area around the same geographical details. So this is very important. The city is very important, right? This is Metropolis, the movie, but the city, this is cosmopolitanism, means internationalism. So the city is key. Now we're making, what are they, 15-minute cities? You can see that they wanted like a congregation of people, and to make it as many people as possible to fit them into these cities, because they don't want you out in the wilderness anymore. You know, you saw it in Brave New World if you read that book or watched the movie. California and that whole area is a place where people travel to see what life used to be like, and it's cavemen having babies and growing food from the ground. And you know, somebody here in Canada just got a $28,000 fine for going out into the wilderness. This is what's going to happen. This is why there's restrictions on travel, and why the imposition of the electric car. This is, you know, it puts limitations on your ability to travel. And I swear that perhaps even in my lifetime, traveling is going to be banned. We're already seeing a ban. Carney's going for a ban on any new gas or diesel vehicles. And it's very easy to see what's going on now. You can see that Carney and Trump are actually working together to, in a dialectic, to bring two polar opposites into resolve, right? The Canadian liberal and the American conservative, left and right wing being converged into one under the emotional battle of tariffs. You go back to the origins of Canada and what delineated America and Canada, you see that tariffs they play a key role. So I encourage people to understand the history there. One of the great series that I saw was The Creation of Canada. It's like a 10-part series. Goes into deep detail on how, especially where I live, British Columbia, was owned at the same time by America and the Brits. And it was called the condominium. So Pound was an active member of the American Sociological Society, and Ross, Howard, and Small were all presidents of ASS. As president, Howard organized the 1917 meeting on the topic of social control. His address, titled Ideals as a Factor in the Future Control of International Society. So using people's ideals, idealism. Idealism really isn't reality. You know, you see George Orwell talk about how ideals meet reality on a battlefield, usually. People don't realize that ideals aren't real until they're facing bullets. This is largely how they commandeered the brain of Woodrow Wilson. And this is largely why they didn't get Roosevelt to do it, because that was their original target. But Roosevelt didn't want to do any experimentation on the US Constitution. This is what I found in the literature. So they switched over to Woodrow Wilson, who was a deep idealist, right? Idealism and this noblesse oblige, this noble approach to society, noble lie, and an unattainable ideal, the perfection of humanity, right? These are unattainable ideals just being used to gain more and more social control. And they like that it'll never be attained because they can continue imposing further and more, just like they say in their books. So as president, he, E.A. Ross here, sponsored ASS sessions on freedom of expression and appointed his friend Roscoe Pound, then of the Harvard Law School, to represent ASS on an interdisciplinary committee that became the mechanism for founding the American Association of University Professors. This is another aspect to that American Association of Universities. There's a subtitle to that, the American Association of University Professors. This is where tenure comes from, the protection of the professor. And it's largely out of these years that they point to as reasons why professors need tenure, to protect them from being fired out of controversy. But nobody ever tells you why these guys were being fired. It's because they were trying to impose socialism and radical progressive social reform, altering Western tradition and value. So while the US was entering the war, academia was already preparing for a future international peace conference aroused by the thought of ideals, largely seen then and today as unattainable. Right? Wilson called it the Paris Peace Conference. The meaning for the calling of it was to make the world safe for democracy. I mean, a larger lie, I'm not sure, exists until you look at the Balfour Declaration. Other lectures of that day were titled War as a Crisis in Social Control in a Democracy, and Social Control in International Relations. And see that they're writing about what they are about to do. And the practitioners, or those people that are actually legislating and regulating, like Brandeis, are adopting the ideas of these men. And where did they get these ideas from? Prussia, these intellectual thinkers that just came through the Prussian Reformation after the defeat of their defeat by Napoleon. Okay, so on to our next character. Albion Woodbury Small was born to Reverend Keith Paris Small and Thankful Lincoln Woodbury Small. Albion studied as a young boy at the Newton Theological Institute, but was never ordained, instead choosing to focus on the social sciences, being taught out of the German Historical School. A centralized, bureaucratic, administrative, progressive government, increasingly more reliant on quantitative data, was an aspect of social responsibility. Small clung tightly to the tenets of especially the social gospel. Because, again, Christianity and socialism have a lot of commonalities, a lot of common ground, a lot of parallels. So Small credited with founding the first sociology department at Chicago University. Same thing happened with psychiatry. He went to Europe, gained the knowledge, came back, opened psychology departments at all the universities. Same here with sociology, the introduction of social sciences, research. This is where it went from education to research. After studying under the founder and longtime chair of German Economic Association, Gustav von Schmoller, misprint there, Freudian misprint, Kahn instead of von. Schmoller, an early teacher of the social sciences and was a major influence in the progressive movement in the United States. So Small wrote his dissertation. We talked about PhDs, gathering their PhDs and telling truth through those, at JHU upon returning from Germany, entitled The Beginnings of American Nationality. Woodrow Wilson and Richard T. Ely, two key progressive founders, were members of his PhD committee. Okay, so Small wrote this dissertation on the beginnings of American nationality. This is the creation of the patriot, somebody that's infused with the idea of manifest destiny and American exceptionalism, American imperialism, willing to build the bombs to kill people in other or backwards races in other countries, on other continents around the world, so that they can have ease and convenience in their technology, watches on their hand, and today, cell phones in their pocket. So Small explained his conception of sociology rooted in evolutionism. Its goal should be to determine social forces by studying the global dynamics of society, its social process, in order to control social change in accordance with ethical principles for the good of society in general. He's using the word ethical, so he's referencing ethical socialism, which is the Fabian society way, and this is from ASA website. This is there now. You could go look. Rooted in evolutionism. They needed this idea of human evolution first, to then make everybody believe that human progress was just part of our DNA. And what is he saying there? Determine social forces by studying the global dynamics of society and realizing its social process in order to then change it. That is Norbert Wiener's feedback loops. That is exactly how they created surface to air missiles. Right? They needed a moving science as much as they needed a moving US Constitution for an always moving society. I hope that's pronounced. I hope that that's profound for you. Because the US Constitution isn't supposed to move at all, is it? So if they wanted to get us off of this US Constitution, freedom of thought and speech, they had to create this idea that we were always moving, this myth of human progress. And evolutionism was the first key step. And today, despite whatever anybody wants to say about evolution, it's still just a theory. Do you really believe we came from apes? Still no proof. Look at the Piltdown Man hoax. These same kind of people here from the Royal Society, all these same social engineers, buried a human skull with an ape mandible and then dug it up and pretended that they discovered the missing link. It was only until 50 years later that somebody said, no, is this coffee on here? And the whole house of cards collapsed. And they have yet to find a missing link. So you can have your identity directly with evolution, and you can think as hard as you want. We come from monkeys, but I'm telling you, man, I don't even think, they are also the ones that label us as animals. But I think we're clearly different than animals in that we have a conscience. We have the ability to chain reasoning together, to think. We can walk away from our appetites. We can delay gratification. We're not an animal. We're a human being. This is one of the myths too, that people grow up and die believing that humans are animals. That's a necessary thought if you want to think that we come from apes. And when you look at Darwin, Galton, Huxley, right? Darwin's bulldog, T.H. Huxley. Look at his kids. Look at his grandkids. Look at what happened. It's the creation of the Brave New World, really. So William G. Sumner, he's Skull and Bones, Yale. Lester Frank Ward, Franklin H. Giddings, Albion W. Small, Charles H. Cooley, and Edward A. Ross. These individuals are generally considered to be the founders of American academic sociology. Their writings can tell a great deal about the development of Marxian sociology in the United States. The present study supports the theory that those founders working at universities in the Midwest were more likely to discuss Marx than the founders from the East Coast because those in the Midwest were at institutions which were more progressive. That's why I said that earlier. The founders often addressed Marx's concepts, which related to his discussions of class, surplus value, capital, capitalism, historical materialism, class consciousness, and property. So the class struggle. Here's William Graham Sumner. He was named first president of the burgeoning sociological society, and we now see undeniably the entire modern fields of sociology and law, as were so many other fields of American academic study first formed overseas in Prussia. Schools of thought brought forward from the Prussian Reformation and imprinted on the minds of these distinguished men of letters and numbers. Sociology and law, looked at from the perspective of these social engineers, all of a sudden become major tools of social control, the most specialized engine of social control, in fact. And it was all invented by men we've never heard of during times we've never lived. Sumner, Phi Beta Kappa, Skull and Bones, attended Göttingen in Germany post-grad. In 1867, he was ordained a deacon in the Protestant Episcopal Church at Trinity Church in New Haven, not far from Yale. He's actually born there. So he was the chair of New Haven. Yeah, he was born in New Haven. He was the chair of political and social sciences at Yale and remained there until his death President of ASS, 1908, 1909, Sumner was inspired by Herbert Spencer and Auguste Comte, taught first ever course called sociology, setting the groundwork for formal academic sociology by Durkheim and Max Weber. Weber, another very influential figure in the development of social sciences in the 20th century. He's probably the guy that everybody points to as a founder of sociology, but it's these guys here that come before him that he learned from. So Albee and Woodbury Small showing a similar pattern after graduating from Colby College in 1876 and studying theology at the Andover Newton Theological School in Massachusetts, as did all the other main founders of sociology, traveled to Germany for 2 years post-grad work. Small studying German history, social economics, and politics from the leading professors at Leipzig and Berlin University. In 1889, Small then travels back to America, gaining his PhD at Johns Hopkins University and founded the very first sociological department at the University of Chicago in 1892. You can go look this up. Go to their own website. They'll proudly tell you these. There he would remain the acting chairman for over 30 years, Small revealing another familiar pattern by harnessing the two main pillars of propaganda, institution and information, by establishing a brick and mortar research department with a faculty while also creating from out of nowhere the foundational literature for a burgeoning new specialty science. They moved to legitimize soft sciences. I'm going to walk away for about a minute. I'll be right back. Okay. So we see how they established these things, right? They established these little societies and periodicals, little reviews that they then disseminate across America, linking their little system of sociologists. So the sociologists at Nebraska University are reading the same material as those at the City College of New York. So it unites them all under the same school of thought. So Small writing, and this is all at University of Chicago, and we all know who founded it, right? And it's founded uh, largely as a theological university originally. Rockefeller threw a bunch of money into the creation of the Chicago University on theological premises. But it's now one of the leading research universities in the world. Marxist, deeply. So Small writing the first sociology textbook, an introduction to the study of society. So when I'm telling you that social science or sociology is the study of human behavior, there it is. The first ever sociology textbook is called An Introduction to the Study of Society. He authors the first sociological journal, the American Journal of Sociology, and was elected Dean of the University of Chicago Graduate School of Arts and Literature. Small influencing the entire field of sociology during its most formative years through establishing both a place to congregate and a way to spread their message, influencing both the political class, the most important group of society to indoctrinate, and the general public, largely made up of the remaining 80% of the population, through broad dissemination of the literary writings, periodicals, and professional journals. Now we get to the conclusion here, final part of this aspect in part 6, Brandeis part 6, science of law. The father of the welfare state, Mr. Porkchops. See the decentralized network in behind? That is America. And I think it's sort of centered around Indianapolis, I believe. So Lester Frank Ward is considered the father of the welfare state and was the very first president of ASS in 1906. He remained at Brown University, which is an Ivy League university, until his death. His book, Dynamic Sociology, was revolutionary, arguing that progress depended on a planned society, order through progress, right? You look at, and I'll digress here quickly, John Stuart Mill, he's a founder of liberalism, Western liberal thought. He's an economist, social contract thinker. And in his book on liberty, he talks about having necessarily one party of order and one party of progress, and you pit them both together in a Hegelian dialectic under hostile banners. So when you look around today, I mean, that book was written in the 1600s, 1700s, and you look around, especially in the United States, there's two parties. Even though you probably have hundreds of people running for president, only two parties really matter. And generally there's one party of order and one party of change, they usually will say. And that means progress. And you can see, if you look at how presidential elections have turned out over the last, my lifetime, 50 something years, it alternates generally. And hostile banners is exactly the phrase that John Stuart Mill uses. John Stuart Mill is associated in this ominous continuity between the utopian socialists of the 1850s and the revolutionary Europe into ethical socialism, the Fabian Society, and then progressive socialism, turn of the century in America. So progress depended on a planned society led and controlled by a benevolent government that provided universal education, freedom from poverty, and happiness for all. When this book was first published, courses in sociology were non-existent in American universities, and by the time the second edition was published in 1896, sociology was being taught in all colleges. That's from the Lester Frank Ward papers. Now, they could be taking some liberties, but when you go to look at the information and how the Association of American Universities evolved, sure shit, this whole idea exploded at this time, especially at the very end of the 19th century. Sure, it was almost all cylinders going. So in his Lester Frank Ward early works, there is little doubt that he was largely influenced by Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, and many other evolutionists. Herbert Spencer, of course, the one that extended the idea of evolution into social Darwinism, yet Herbert Spencer wrote prior to Darwin. So Darwin actually is adopting a lot of the ideas of Spencer. General consensus, or the general idea of people towards Darwin and Spencer, think that Spencer came after, and this idea of survival of the fittest applied to society, human society, came after the idea of evolution. But Darwin borrows a lot of his ideas from Spencer, okay? So that's from page 45, Regional Differences in the Treatment of Karl Marx by the Founders of American Academic Sociology by Richard Allen Wallace. And his belief in the role of government in changing the environment and promoting reform led historian Henry Steele Commager to describe Ward as the philosophical architect of the modern welfare state. So Ward is best remembered for his pioneering work in sociology. Between 1883 and his death in 1913, he completed several important works, including dynamic sociology, outlines of sociology, pure sociology, and applied sociology. How are we going to take all this information and now apply it? Here's the picture of Indianapolis. And decentralized, although this looks very centralized, doesn't it, into the bigger cities? Once you get out of the rural areas, not so centralized. It looks like all routes here lead to Indianapolis. This is the opening up of the West, going from a farm environment into that of a city in order to collect, attract. I mean, straight out of high school, I basically went to the city. I moved to Vancouver. I couldn't believe that people would stay after high school in such a small, boring town. But now in my 50s, I get it. You know, I was really persuaded by the bright lights of the big city. This is part of their plan, to get everybody into cities, out of the regional, rural areas. Franklin Henry Giddings is another key guy. He was the son of a very prominent Congregational Reverend, a professor of political science at Bryn Mawr College, beginning in 1888, and would leave to become the chair of sociology at Columbia University in 1894. Also considered a founder of sociology, Giddings wrote The Principles of Sociology, The Theory of Socialization, The Elements of Sociology. He was the president of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, a member of the Century Club, the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, the vice president of the American Economic Association, and founder of ASS. So Century Club is a direct connection to the Bohemian Club. The Century Club is where Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson were all members. All three of the presidential candidates of the 1912 election, all Century Club members. I've got provenance, primary source material showing all of this. This is documented historical fact. This is from out of where, you know, the journey to find the magic mushroom comes from. Okay, Gordon Wasson, the guy that goes to Mexico, finds the magic mushroom, brings it back, and then they synthesize it into LSD. He's a member of the Century Club, but he's also the head of propaganda at JP Morgan. So you can see it's all about subjugating. It's all about diminishing our consciousness. You know, booze, alcohol, look at how quickly are you unconscious if you have 6 beer. You know, and even after 1 beer, I'm not in the mindset to get into this kind of material. If you know what I mean. After a beer or two, you just kind of want to hang out and talk. It gets pretty difficult to read detailed information like this. So the following men were elected officers of the new society: Lester Ward, William Sumner, Franklin Giddings, C.W.A. Veditz, and council members were E.A. Ross, Small. So when they left Baltimore, the birth of the American Sociological Society was complete. A constitution had been adopted, officers were elected, and plans were made for the second annual meeting of the new society. From the ASA website, see they changed their names. It's now the American Sociological Association. So they're the ASA now. So that's postal routes arranged about Indianapolis as a center. So what is postal routes but the spreading of information? Propagation. So together, Ward, Small, Howard, Ross, and Pound established sociology as a legit science and set the future course for both sociology and sociological jurisprudence in America for the rest of the 20th century. Other interesting past presidents of ASS include George Edgar Vincent, 1916. Vincent was the president of the Chautauqua Institution. That's the word I was trying to remember in the last show. This Chautauqua movement was Christianity and these outdoor camp revivals. And Chautauqua movement was the first people to set foot and live in the Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles, now almost completely burnt down. and, largely a Jewish area. This is known in Los Angeles. People will know that. The Pacific Palisades largely where the Jews hang out. And one of the first ever houses there was the Villa Aurora, which today is still a Marxist political salon. So other past presidents include the two main contributors to the Princeton Radio Research Project and the famous Invasion from Mars, War of the Worlds broadcast, Robert K. Merton, born Meyer Robert Skolnick, and Paul Felix Lazarsfeld, both Jews. These two were also funded heavily in their work by the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, if anybody doesn't know about this Princeton Radio Research Project, this is where they were researching our behavior through radio. This is before television. Newspapers existed, but radio was burgeoning, and they were doing experiments in watching our behavior. And these are the guys behind this War of the Worlds broadcast. All funded by Rockefeller, and Rockefeller funded their emigration here, or at least Lazarsfeld. Funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, there was 303 scholars removed from Europe because of the rising tensions in Germany in the 1930s. Lazarsfeld Merton famously wrote Mass Communication, Popular Taste, and Organized Social Action in 1948. So just as television is coming about. And are the very coiners of the term narcotizing dysfunction and the one and two-step flow of communication models. For obvious reasons, the society changed its name to the American Sociological Association and today remains very relevant, publishing over a dozen sociology journals and magazines. So here I'll digress if I can. I'm just going to stop share for a sec. And we're going to go into the files. Can I do this? Let's see if I can do this. Hang on. Of course, that's got to diminish for me to get to it. It's playing games with me. Okay. There we go. So we share. We're going to share this. Okay, you should be seeing one of my files. This is from Drift and Mastery, one of the, if not the first book that Walter Lippmann wrote. And I went through this on the last show. But it's here. So I'll click on it again and we'll go over it again. So from the introduction, progressive is what we like. And the word new, be it the new nationalism of Roosevelt, the new freedom of Wilson, or the new socialism of the syndicalists, right? Progressive is the word that we're going to use. Now, two-step flow of communication. You can see I've got quite an extensive collection of files on nearly everything relevant to this progressive era. So we put in two-step flow, we're going to get this. Lazarsfeld Martin's two-step flow of communication. I'm hoping that you can see that. I can always make sure. Let's just ensure that that's actually on there. Just stop share and share that. Okay. The two-step flow of communication should be looking at the ugly mugs of Zuckerman, Clooney, and Winfrey. So the two-step flow of communication theory. Stories are told by the media and then propagated throughout society through famous people, celebrity, right? This is the argumentum ad verecundium, a subset of the argumentum ad auctoritatem, appeal to authority. This is appeal to famous people. Just use the term. Okay. Okay. Now, also the one-step flow of communication we're going to get to. Just give me a sec. We'll go back to that same search, okay? Back to pictures. We'll put one step. You should get somewhere here. It's not showing up. Let's try it. Okay, let's try hypodermic needle. There it is. The one-step flow of communication is there, or the hypodermic needle theory. So give me a sec, I'll get that shared. This is why I don't, it's a little clunky, right? It'd be nice to just be able to bring this up without any interruption. But there you go. The hypodermic needle theory developed in the 1920s and 30s, linear communication theory, passive audience, no individual difference. The direct infusion of information from the media. So there's no celebrity in between, no argumentum ad veracundium. This is just an appeal to authority. Because Peter Jennings said so, or Tucker Carlson said so. Therefore, it is true. This is a logical fallacy. Okay. This is what Lazarsfeld and Merton created, and Rockefeller funded them to create through study. So back to Brandeis part 6. Narcotizing dysfunction, meaning inundate the listener or the viewer of television or the reader of newspapers with so much disinformation or contradictory information to narcotize them into dysfunction. So that, like a drug, right? Give them so much information that they can't tell up from down. Does that sound familiar? One-step flow of communication model, two-step flow of communication model, hypodermic needle theory. Sound familiar? So the mass media prove most effective when they operate in a situation of virtual psychological monopoly. This is taken from mass communication, Lazarsfeld and Merton. Or when the objective is one of canalizing rather than modifying basic attitudes, or when they operate in conjunction with face-to-face contacts. Now, keep in mind, this is written in 1948. You know, these ideas were still being developed. We saw it really in its full maturation in COVID, because you could see actual things happening in the effective environment, like lineups to get COVID shots under temporary tents. And that matched the pseudo environment that the mainstream media on the two-dimensional screen that only talks to you, that they were purporting. Mainstream media was like, oh my God, here's a virus. And then to make the face-to-face contacts also further substantiate that, so that people really believe that it's happening. But these three conditions are rarely satisfied conjointly in propaganda for social objectives, to the degree that monopolization of attention is rare. This is what they've been trying to do: grab your attention, keep you captivated, spellbound, literally black magic. The monopolization of your attention. So anybody out there talking Tucker Carlson or any of these narratives that are going on right now, voting harder, waiting for a savior, all this bullshit. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Are you paying attention to the spectacle? Are you paying attention to things that they gave you? Finally, for the most obvious of reasons, the close collaboration of mass media and locally organized centers for face-to-face contact has seldom been achieved in groups striving for planned and social change, or striving for planned social change. Because they just didn't have the network yet. They didn't have the infrastructure built. Such programs are expensive. In view of the present organization of business ownership and control of the mass media, they have served to cement the structure of our society. Organized business does approach a virtual psychological monopoly of the mass media. Face-to-face contacts with those who have been socialized in our culture serve primarily to reinforce the prevailing culture patterns. Thus, the very conditions which make for the maximum effectiveness of the mass media of communication, operate toward maintenance of the going social and cultural structure. So to canalize, they use that word canalizing in the second line there. So to canalize is to convey something through a channel or duct. A narrow strait can so canalize the tide that a powerful current is developed. Television, the ultimate and persuasive social machinery, in that it combines written word, spoken word, music, and motion picture all into the most dangerously potent form of propaganda on the planet. I think they started with paintings, right? The 1913 Armory show was about French expressionist art. They didn't have television yet. So by introducing the West to sociology, Ross, Small, Howard were following a similar pattern observed when researching the parallel creations of psychology, psychiatry, and philosophy departments that helped establish the Association of American Universities. Our Western K through 12 education system too, adopted directly from Prussian PhD system. People become cogs in the wheel of something bigger turning. The founders of sociology establishing the two main pillars of propaganda by being the first to establish brick and mortar research departments with their own faculty and authoring the foundational literature necessary for the propagation of a burgeoning soft science. They're trying to legitimize all of this bullshit. We see the inner workings of manifest destiny. The chart below, a chart designed to show the distribution of functions at various stages of social organization, speaks like the blueprint for the 7 functions of society, so important to the Changing Images of Man study that SRI published 100 years later. The development of the individual within society being driven by his basic values to act according to the stimulus applied by way of feedback loop some 40 years before Norbert Wiener's famous discovery and the onset of the cybernetic age. Subtly and slowly steering our interests away from the natural agrarian farm life to that of a stainless steel metropolitan, and more accurately, a cosmopolitan lifestyle. These are code words for universalism, internationalism, collectivism, globalism, New World Order. Okay, and this is the chart it's spoken of. And if you look on the left, that is family functions. Okay, and what would be needed to have a healthy family function is propagation, socialization, its economic activities and protection. Into those, they break into smaller and smaller subgroups, social intercourse, education, ethical culture, and discipline, all the way over to the far right of the most complicated nature of city life, of our new modern, postmodern life. Okay, so they identified all of these institutions as necessary to the creation of a healthy society through the family unit. Talk about division, distribution of functions at various stages of social organization. So I invite you to go and check that work out, as well as any of the other work that has been named in here. So the functional many-sidedness of the primary social combination, the family, is of great significance. The family displays in microcosm all the activities of the village, city, or nation. This is not to be construed into an assertion that the nation is merely a larger structure of the family type, or that modern government corresponds to parental authority, which both do. Why else is it the nanny state? Why else would you want us all dependent on the state, modern government? And the SRI, Changing Images of Man studies, and just general critical thinking tells you that the health of the society is really a mirror of the family unit. The state, in many ways, parallel to the family unit in its structure, and a despotic government, really, because the father is really the leader and everybody falls under his rules and commands as long as you're under his roof. So in conditions generally recognized as normal, propagation is exclusively a function of the family, which therefore serves as a connecting link between physical life and that of the social organism. It is the peculiar service of the family to produce the new individuals who take the places of those that perish. In order that a society may attain a high degree of organization and stability, it is necessary that its individual members should be brought into orderly relations with the land. Functions exclusively or largely performed by the family are propagation, location of settlement, defense, production, apportionment and transmission, communication, intellectual training, socialization. All these activities combine in the one general function of preserving the physical and psychical continuity of society. Okay. So there's the founders of sociology, social science. When you look at all of the radical social reform today, keep your eyes and ears open for progress and the word new, but also social science, how much research institutions are involved in social science and the controlling or steering of society. Okay, so that's a little bit shorter than Brandeis Part 5. Definitely leave some comments. Anybody wants to add anything to any of this, by all means, throw it in the comments section when I get this published. I think I'm going to publish this in a week. We're going to do premieres on YouTube, and we need people to subscribe to the History of Propaganda. If you want to support our work, it's going to be through our farm. So if you want to donate to us, support us, this all goes directly to the growth of our farm and the further studying of all of this information. So you can actually drop support at our e-transfer site. I'm not doing anything else, but Hell's Half Acre Farms, Kelowna at gmail.com. If you want to support our work, if you find that this is helpful and this information important, well, we're the only ones putting it out there. So it would make sense to support us. Give us a little bit of stability so we can keep going in the fall. Okay. So thanks to everybody that's been watching, followed all the way through. And I encourage you to use this material as reference material. Get to know these names like the back of your hand. Because as you converse with people out there in the effective environment, your real environment, the better you understand these ideas and thoughts and these people and institutions and how it evolved, the more concise, clear speaking and attractive you become. Okay. So with that all being said, I appreciate your time. There's Brandeis Part 6. Look forward to Brandeis. It's actually Part 7. We step away from Brandeis now a little bit and sort of talk about the macro ideas of everything in the following 3. I'll get these out, and hopefully I can get another podcast out on the year 1913, perhaps, how Huxley hijacked Hollywood, to show you how the political salons work in Los Angeles to infiltrate Hollywood. You'll be just as blown away by that as this. Okay? So, cheers, everybody. You guys enjoy your time. We'll talk soon.